Canada is affected by the Hamas-Israeli war. This is the Great White North Report.
I'm in love with the system, never going home. I'm in love.
Now, I waited all week before making a video. Actually, I made several videos but changed my mind on how I want to say it. And though my opinion has not changed in the last week, still there's things that need to be said, I think. Now, everyone knows that Hamas made a major raid on Israeli territory. And they did it in such a spectacular fashion that it got them a lot of publicity, negative as well as positive, depending on what side of that fence you're on. And what they do, they went after a couple of military outposts, they went after some police stations, and they mostly targeted a lot of civilians at a music festival. Like, come on. Unarmed civilians were killed and murdered. Some of them were babies that were beheaded by these animals. So much chaos and destruction, and they left behind members of their military organization simply to ambush the response forces of Israel and to create more chaos behind the lines. Now, Israel has basically taken back all of the territory that Hamas was previously in, and they have killed many of those militants. Israel declared war on Hamas, and they've started bombing the Gaza Strip with rockets and airplanes. Hamas retaliates with rockets. Israel shut off the water and electricity, which previously they've been supplying for free to the Gaza Strip. People are getting mad at them for that. Like, what are you talking about? You're in war. It's a war. I'm not going to give them free electricity and water if I'm at war with you. I can give your heads a shake, people. They did it themselves. When Hamas was elected to the Gaza Strip, they won 75% of the vote. Today, it still stands at a 75% approval rating, supposedly. Opposition to Hamas is virtually non-existent within the Gaza Strip, as far as civilian goes. There are military elements within Hamas, different groups that pressured Hamas into making this huge gamble, which they've been preparing for years. It just doesn't happen overnight. Hamas has a major backer, which is Iran. So the Israelis are bombing. They're going to probably start a land campaign soon, if not already. And they've warned northern Gaza to clear out the civilian population. At least the Israelis are warning them, unlike Hamas, which doesn't warn you. And it's something Israel has been doing for quite some time, because Hamas hides behind civilians. They store weapons and equipment in schools, hospitals, in mosques, so that when the Israelis destroy those, they can use it for propaganda purposes. Oh, look, they destroyed our school. Meanwhile, you fired rockets from there. What do you expect? But because we and the rest of the world doesn't take it like that, and the press doesn't help, our supposed journalistic integrity among the mainstream media doesn't exactly help. So there's been some Canadians that have been killed, both in Israel and in Gaza, because being in a society like ours, there are going to be people who are from those regions. Now, back here in Canada, thankfully, our major politicians from the four major parties have all condemned Hamas, which is the right thing to do. So Trudeau, Poilievre, Singh even, and the Bloc Québécois leader, who I can't remember his name. But of course, then we get these idiots in Canada. A lot of pro-Arab demonstrations held in downtown Montreal as Hamas-Israel conflict escalates. And it goes even further. Some of the NDP. This is why I never vote NDP, because there's too many leftist nuts on there. This woman, Sarah Jama, denounced what she called apartheid and human rights violations in Gamma without mentioning the attack on Israel by Hamas terrorists. She's from Somalia. She moved here to Canada. She knows nothing, I don't think, about the conflict in the Middle East. She refuses to retract her statement, but has apologized, which tells you, and these people elected her? Someone that dumb? No wonder I never vote NDP. She called apartheid and human rights violations in the Gaza. And then we have these people marching. Let's step back in time for a minute. There was such a thing as called the Kingdom of Judea, which ruled from Jerusalem. And Judea means home of the Jews, basically, or Kingdom of the Jews, home of the Jews, whatever you want to call it. That's where the Jews settled and have been there for thousands of years. I know if you want, you go back to the Philistine era and they took lands from them. Well, we can go down that rabbit hole with pretty much every major country and people, nationality. The Jews are there in the Kingdom of Judea. They get taken over by the Assyrians, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Persians. The Romans come along. The Kingdom of Judea is a client kingdom. It's a client state. It means it supported Roman interests in the Middle East. It was a common thing back then, until the Jewish decided to revolt. They did so twice. The first time, the Second Temple was destroyed, which is on the Temple Mount, in which the Muslims have erected a mosque and don't allow Jews to pray there. So the Jewish most holy site in Judaism, in Jerusalem, on the Temple Mount, they can't go there to pray because Muslims get all upset. Because Muslims like to dominate when they're in the majority. So the Romans decided to change the name from Judea to Palestine as a slap in the face to the Jewish people in reference to the Philistines. Now, the Romans kicked a lot of Jews out, exiled a lot of Jewish people, but many still stayed especially in the countryside. So there have been Jews still living in what is now Israel for thousands of years. And they've existed there all throughout the Byzantium period, into the Umayyad period, the Abbasid period, and all the way up until the Ottoman period. There have always been Jews in the Holy Land. It is a common fact. They were treated like second-class citizens for the most part in their own homeland and had to pay the jizya under the Muslim rule, which is a tax on all non-believers as a protection tax against Muslims. So let that sink in. Now, the name was revived by Jewish people, though, a Jewish organization calling themselves the Palestine Zionist Movement. A bunch of wealthy Jewish people living abroad put their money together, started buying up land from absentee landlords in Ottoman-held South Syria, or Beirut, the province of Beirut, depending which one it was. They're kind of interchangeable in history. And they would buy up land and have Jewish people migrate to that area. Well, the Jews are already there, so they're just coming back in. Slowly but surely, they go to and they revive what was once a backwater. Arabs come over and they also coexist peacefully with these Jewish settlements because they're so successful. Creates jobs. That's at first. Then during World War I, the British recruited Jewish and Arabic forces to help them fight the Ottomans. And they promised the Jews and the Arabs their own homelands within the Ottoman Empire. So after World War I, the League of Nations decides to give the British a mandate in what is now Israel and Jordan. The French get Syria and Lebanon. So the British, they work to set up a Jewish homeland and an Arabic homeland. Plus there's another Arabic homeland in Jordan, the Jordanians. But they're going to split what is now Israel into two. The Jewish people get a slightly bigger half, but a lot of it's desert. The southern portion of it is the desert, the Negev. Most Arabic leaders don't agree with it. They don't want the Jews there because they can't dominate them then. So what happens in 1948? Israel declares its independence and the Arabs invade. The Arabs from the Transjordan, so Jordan, Egypt, Syria, with help from Saudi Arabia and Iraq, as well as the Arabs that live in what would have been their own homeland. Now there were atrocities committed by both sides. Can't sugarcoat that. And 700,000 Arabs fled their homelands, their homes, and went into refugee camps. Some fled because there were some atrocities by the Jewish far right that was condemned by most Jewish people at the time. And because the Arabs also convinced many of them to flee and they'd be able to go back home later. So you have 700,000 people fleeing. The war ends, Israel wins. What happens next? Every Muslim country that has a Jewish population kicks their Jews out. Iran was the last one in 1980 to kick out their Jews only because the Shah of Iran fell from power and fled, and the Ayatollah Khomeini kicked out the Jews. So it's a religious thing then. 900,000 Jewish people are kicked out of their homes. 900,000 on one side, 700,000 on the other. The Jews split up pretty evenly. Many of them go abroad to Western countries, which are more lenient now, while the others go to Israel and swell its numbers. Now, the Israelis also allow some Arabs to come back to their homes, and they recompensate others with monetary when they can. Land claims can be proved, mostly land claims. Not about work. If I have a job here and I fled, why should I get my job back? Now, keep in mind that not every Arab fled. There are still Arabs living in Israel that have lived there for hundreds of years, if not over 1,000 years. Israel is stronger because they go through the Suez Crisis. They then go through the Six-Day War, which sees the Israelis take all the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, and they take over the West Bank from Jordan. Jordan had taken the West Bank after the 48 War, which had supposed to be going to some Arabs that were living in that region. as their own country. So after the 6-Day War, you get the Yom Kippur War, which, although Israel had some setbacks, they eventually won. So the Arabs have lost 3 major wars, and they're scattered still to this day in refugee camps after 75 years. You know, at World War II, we had millions of refugees after World War II, and the World War II refugee camp closed in 1952, 7 years after. Cambodia would be another one I could think of. Millions of Cambodians were in refugee camps along the Thai border. The last one of those closed in 1995, 12 to 15 years after the Khmer Rouge and Vietnamese period of Cambodia. Why is this so different? Because the Arabs who were in those refugee camps were promised they'd go home. Now, the Jordanians did take a few of them in, and I know a few have gone probably to Dubai in the Emirates, but for the most part, no one wants them. Their fellow Arabs don't want them. So in 1964, the Palestinian Liberation Organization is formed, the PLO, in the 1960s. They hijacked the name Palestinian as a propaganda thing, and now it's being used. It worked. It's being used everywhere. I refuse to call them that. They're Arabs to me. It must be noted that the Arabs leaders of the time in the 60s had the 3 no's: no recognition of Israel, no negotiation with Israel, and no peace with Israel. Those are the 3 no's that the Arab leaders announced in the 60s after the 6-Day War. Since then, Egypt have signed peace deals. So Hamas, Fatah, and Hezbollah still use the 3 no's. Fatah, who rules the West Bank, or controls most of the West Bank, they're the quieter of the 3, but they still do not officially recognize Israel. If you read between the lines of their declarations, there's a truce, but there's no final word on anything. So that's the backstory behind that. Now I don't understand this apartheid and Israeli apartheid. What is that? Is not Gaza its own city-state? Are they not independent to do whatever the hell they want? And look what they've accomplished. Nothing. Their accomplishments are only to make more war, hurt more people, indiscriminately. Hamas regularly launches rockets from North Gaza into Israel without warning, and they don't care who they hit. So they're not only killing Israeli Jews, they're also killing Israeli Arabs. Men, women, children, the elderly. Doesn't matter who they hit. They don't care. And they're so sensitive. They're such babies. The littlest thing will set them off. The Arabs. Which is why you see a lot of violence in the streets, like in the West Bank and in Jerusalem. Israeli apartheid, again. There is no such thing. These people are taking something way out of context. Apartheid was a South African and maybe a Rhodesia, which is now Kenya. But that's over with. In Israel, there are Israeli Jews and there's Israeli Arabs. They both have the same equal rights in the people. I think 21% of the Israeli population is Arab, which means they're Muslim. Though there might be a small percentage of being Christian. The Arabs there have all the rights of an Israeli Jew. Many of them work in the branches of government. They go to the schools, same schools. They get jobs. They also can be elected and serve in the Knesset. I think I pronounced that wrong. Which is the Israeli parliament. So the only thing they are not allowed to do is join the army. There is no forced conscription of Israeli Arabs, unlike Israeli Jews who have to serve the country for a couple of years. Arabs are not allowed for 2 reasons. First reason, because they don't really trust them with weapons. They might turn on them, which is a possibility. Secondly, the Israelis, the government does not want to be accused of sending Arabs to fight Arabs and putting the Arabs in the front line to get shot at first. It's pragmatic. Some Arabs do join the medical corps in the army to be ambulance drivers and whatnot. So I don't understand what this is really apartheid. Well, they're saying that the people of Gaza should be able to move freely between Gaza and Israel? Don't be ridiculous. Israel has a border. Yes, it's fenced in and walled in. What, you don't think North Korea and South Korea don't have one of those? Try the DMZ up there. Find out how much of a cage that is. The North Koreans can't even get out of their own country by their own government. In Israel, they have military checkpoints and fences and walls and whatnot around their borders. And they do not allow their people to move freely simply because they don't know which ones of them will come in to kill people. militants will go through and kill people. It's a precaution. Why would I let them in if they're going to kill my citizens? Can you imagine in Canada if an American came out with guns in his truck, even a hunting rifle? The Canadian Border Forces, they descend on the truck. They search it for guns. And they get caught, they get turned away, or a gun gets confiscated. If a Canadian goes to the United States border and gets caught with marijuana, guess what happens to him? It's the same thing. Now Hamas, they use, when countries like Canada donate cement to help build stuff in Gaza, guess where it goes? A large portion of it goes down to make tunnels under the Israeli border and the Egyptian border. Remember, there's also an Egyptian border. The Egyptians have closed their border off to Gaza. They don't want them in either. The Egyptian government has their own problems with the Muslim Brotherhood. They don't need to add idiots like the Hamas. So Hamas, they dig tunnels underneath the border for Egypt so they can get supplies in illegally, like weapons and stuff to make weapons. And they tunnel to infiltrate Israel on the other side to kill people. Or if we send them pipes, metal pipes for plumbing and stuff like that, and water, Hamas will use those to make rockets. They're not helping their people, but their people support them, mainly because the education system is geared towards hatred towards Jews. The United Nations is turning a blind eye towards it, and that's why I'm not a big fan of the United Nations. I think Canada should pull out of that for all intents and purposes. So the United Nations is corrupted from its original goals and can't be trusted. They turn a blind eye to a lot of things that happen in Gaza. Our distinguished press also do that too. They turn a blind eye to a lot of things, and they show what Hamas wants you to see. They want their people to suffer. They don't care if their people suffer, as long as they win, as long as they seem to be winning. Hamas would rather their people die than give in. Now, there's also a naval blockade. Well, since Hamas was elected and became in power, and Hamas is one of those who will not stop until they see every Jew killed, the destruction of Israel, which there has been a naval blockade to stop weapons from getting in. Iran and Syria, before the collapse of Syria, they would ship things from Aleppo down to Gaza. The Israelis blockaded as best as they can. And like I mentioned, they continue to warn civilians to leave. When Israelis retaliate against Hamas rocket attacks in the past, they've always warned people to get out of the building before they strike it, which seems kind of dumb, but collateral damage. Hamas will use that collateral damage as propaganda. Hamas will win the propaganda war because every Muslim out there will believe what Hamas tells you. But does not Israel have the right to defend itself in this case? Like, that was a major raid that killed hundreds of people, and more were taken hostage. I read one article where the guy was happy that his 8-year-old daughter was killed, because if she'd been captured and taken back, it would have been more horrifying. Probably would have been sold off and raped. You can remember Hamas parades prisoners through the streets, degrades them, making them showpieces, like a Roman triumph almost. Unfortunately, we've allowed a lot of Arabs from that region to come over here, and this is why we get this. We've allowed too many over here, and now they feel they can show their support, even though it was Hamas who started this. Many times since 48, the Israelis have offered peace. There was once where they even offered to give back 99% of the disputed territory. In exchange for peace, the Arabs said no. So let's give one final note here. If Hamas, the Arabs of the West Bank, Hezbollah, and other militant groups that operate in the Syrian region, as well as all the Arabs militants that exist in Israel itself, were to lay down their arms to the Israelis, there would be peace. If the Israelis laid down their arms and surrendered to these groups, there would be genocide. So for all you listening to this, please leave comments in the comment section. Always happy to hear from anyone. And until next time, this has been the Great White North Report.
I'm in love.